watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 70 of the podcast. I am alone today, as you can see if you're watching. If you're listening, I'm just telling you, but I'm alone today. Solo episode for this week. But we are continuing in our Spielberg series in the middle portion of his career right now, covering his movies of the 90s. And we are into 1997 and covering his movie Amistad today. So we don't have a guest, obviously, to introduce. So yeah, we're going to just jump right into it, I guess. I did want to say, I guess, before we do that, if you have not reviewed the podcast and you've enjoyed listening, I would really appreciate it if you would just hit the pause button. It takes maybe a minute to give it a review and a rating on Apple and Spotify especially, but anywhere where you listen, I would love for you to leave a review. It just helps the visibility of the podcast, helps other people to find it. And if you like it, I would hope that you would want other people to find it and like it as well. So just give a quick review. It really just takes a minute. And I'd be okay if you stopped listening and did that, unless you're like driving or something. But yeah, go ahead and do that. I would greatly appreciate it. But yeah, other than that, I'm just going to jump right in. We are covering Amistad today. This is, man, I don't even know how many films Spielberg has done at this point. It's his, let's see, fourth film of the 90s. So a little bit slower than his run in the 80s. He is pumping them out in the 80s. And a little slower now. So let's see. This would be, if you don't count Duel, this is his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18th movie. If you count the Twilight Zone. 17th if you don't count the Twilight Zone. So I know that's what you tuned in today to listen to me count on the podcast. But that's a lot of movies. And we have a decent amount more to go. So yeah, it's we're moving here. We're on his 18th movie. Really getting into the weeds of things, and really 19th if you count Duel, which I kind of do, because I don't really count his other two TV movies. They're there. But Duel was a legit movie that did have a run in theaters, technically in Europe. So yeah, so he's done a lot at this point. He's done a lot. And we're getting into his mid-90s. He's coming off of the most successful year ever. He goes back and has a little dip with The Lost World, Jurassic Park. Not terribly. It made its money, but it's not terribly well received. And so, he's looking for something to do. He's started his new studio with a couple other guys, DreamWorks, which we all now know very well. But at the time, it was brand new. Started that in '94. The Lost World, Jurassic Park, was not a DreamWorks movie because that franchise was already with Universal. So we had to make The Lost World with Universal. But he's moving into 1997, 3 years after DreamWorks was started, and doing his first movie under his new studio in Amistad. Now, next week, a little bit of a teaser. I'm gonna do a little bit of a kind of. I'll have a review of a movie that a listener wanted me to review. It's actually not just a listener, but a supporter. So if you do support the podcast, you can pick a movie that I have to review. And so that's what happened. So it'll seem a little bit random, but that's because a supporter of the show picked it for me to review. So I'll do that next week. But along with that, I'm going to kind of go through the history of Spielberg starting up DreamWorks. And so we'll get into that a little bit next week. But not this week. This week we're talking about Amistad. Amistad started back in I believe 84, maybe, with Debbie Allen. She was she had done some acting. She was a dancer and choreographer especially. And she had been trying to get this movie made for like 10 years. She had read this book, the Amistad 1 Writings on Black History and Culture by John Alfred Williams and Charles F. Harris. She read this book in college. Found this forgotten story of these 1839 slaves taken from Africa, captured. They were on this Spanish ship, the Amistad, with some, a Spanish crew trying to take them to sell them, or I'm not exactly sure what they were doing with them. But they were on their way. Then these captured Africans revolted and took over the ship. They were captured off the coast of Connecticut, and eventually they were imprisoned for like 2 years. It took 2 years, and then they were finally in the Supreme Court. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they were acquitted and freed in 1841, 2 years later. This was kind of a first in U.S. history, I guess a decently important case, and it was 20 years before the Civil War. The Civil War started 20 years later. So this was, this is an important story, and it's an important event in history. Debbie Allen really wanted a movie made about it. She saw it as a major event, really unknown by most people, even in the Black community, which Debbie Allen is a Black woman. She talked about how it really spoke to her. It's about her ancestors. And in 1984, she acquired the rights to another book called Black Mutiny, The Revolt on the Schooner Amistad. I think you say schooner and not schooner, but who knows? So she gets the rights to this book. She's trying to get it made. It's been 10 years, and she's struggling to find a director. Even directors like Spike Lee and John Singleton, Black directors, knew about the story. Allen talked to them, but they just didn't think they could get it financed. Their question was, why would a studio give millions to make this movie about Black people by Black people? Really unfortunate. But they passed. They just didn't think it was going to work with them directing it. And lo and behold, as I said, Spielberg had just started DreamWorks. And they had the goal of putting art back at the center of filmmaking, and we'll talk a little bit about that next week. But Allen talks to Laurie McDonald and Walter Parks, who at the time were in charge of development at DreamWorks, and they get her a 25-minute meeting with Steven Spielberg in his, of course, busy schedule. So Debbie Allen had seen Schindler's List and thought that, hey, Spielberg nailed it with Schindler's List. I think he can handle a story like this. And yeah, their 25-minute meeting turns into an hour meeting. And this is a quote from Spielberg. He said, quote, "She had me after 10 minutes, really. She impressed upon me the importance of the African culture. And this film industry does not make movies about African subjects. And Debbie was passionate. Why can't Hollywood change?" Unquote. And so, it's Spielberg, was like, okay, let's try this. I saw some conflicting information. Like, I think one thing said that Spielberg had never heard the story, but then I'm pretty sure in the making of documentary, Spielberg says he had heard briefly of the story. So maybe he just was unfamiliar with the details of it and could kind of heard something about it before. But the story really touched him. He was really moved by the story and the idea and the historical event. Part of the reason he felt closer to it Him and Kate Capshaw, his wife, had at this point adopted 2 black kids along with their 3 biological children. Well, not biological for both of them, but children of from them each. But they had also adopted 2 black kids, Theo and Michaela. Um, and yeah, so this was really spoke to him. It was a movie that I think I heard or read that Spielberg, felt like, making this movie, I would love for my kids, black and white, to watch this, learn about this event where children before might not have known about it. So um, this, as I said before, became his first DreamWorks project, and he was really walking on eggshells after the Color Purple criticisms that he had gotten. He knew he'd get backlash for the white perspective. Kind of knew that going in, um, and we'll really get into that, all of that later. I'm going to try to cover mostly the history and the production stuff for a bit because it's a lot. It's a lot to talk about. And I feel like I'm not qualified to talk about it, so maybe I'm getting into this a bit like Spielberg and talking on something that really someone else should be talking on. I did find a black critic of the time to pull some quotes from, so I could make sure I was representing a black perspective well. And I know that's nuanced, and there's different opinions and different perspectives in the black community. It's not a singular perspective. But I did want to make sure I was doing my due diligence as another white man trying to cover a tough subject. But again, we'll get into that later. Just wanted to give that caveat that I am well aware that I am not the the one to make the judgment, but I will make a judgment nonetheless. This is a podcast. I've got to cover this movie, and so I've got to talk about it. So, yeah. So he attempted to circumvent the criticism. He called in some historians trying to make the movie more irreproachable. This guy, David Franzoni, wrote one of the first treatments of the movie. Franzoni later wrote Gladiator in 2000, so that's something that you would recognize from him. He doesn't have a very big filmography, but he did write Gladiator. The story was accurate, but Spielberg was not really satisfied with it, and so he asked his buddy Steven Zaillian to come rework it. Zaillian, of course, was the writer of Schindler's List with Spielberg. Due to some legal wrangling, Zaillian didn't get any screen credit for writing in the movie, but he did do a lot of reworking on that Franzoni script. But yeah, when you watch the movie, Franzoni's the one that gets the screen credit. So more crew. You have Debbie Allen, Spielberg, and Colin Wilson producing the movie. The screenplay, as I said, by David Franzoni and Steve Zaillian. Janusz Kaminski is returning again and will continue to return for the rest of Spielberg's career, to date at least, as the director of photography, cinematographer. So Mitch Dubin is the camera operator for the movie. He does have some assistant directors, some returning, at least this first one returning from Schindler's List, Sergio Mimica Gazan, Sean Hoban, and Eric Jones. Where it seems like Spielberg has, as his career has gone on, is taking more use of assistant directors and second unit directors more and more. He's got a lot going on, so he needs some help. Of course, his tried and true editor, Michael Kahn, and tried and true composer, and John Williams are working with him on the film. You have some sound guys in Charles L. Campbell and Louis L. Edelman, who have kind of been on and off working with Spielberg since E.T. Another guy, Doug Jackson, is not working with Spielberg quite as much. And then Ron Judkins is a name that we've been saying more recently, working on movies like Hook and Jurassic Park with him. Rick Carter is back for the production design. He had started working with Spielberg on his Amazing Stories television series. and then jumped on with Jurassic Park, which of course had some incredible production design. So he's kind of kept working with Rick Carter, um, set decorator Rosemary Brandenburg, and Tris Luberti, costume designer Ruth E. Carter. So here you're starting to get some more black crew in Ruth E. Carter. Ruth Carter worked a lot with Spike Lee over his career, and you may or may not recognize her name because she won for costume design for the movie Black Panther when it came out. So she's been nominated several times, maybe 4 times, and has won that once. Special effects was done by Tom Ryba, who had worked some with Spielberg on Hook. And then casting was done by Victoria Thomas. If you look at Victoria Thomas's filmography for casting work, she's done a ton of work filling movies with black actors. So and really, like, when I was looking through, go look through her filmography. I'm not going to pull it up right now, but you'll notice, man, these are a lot of movies that are full of like really great black actor performances. So really smart to get in Victoria Thomas to help with the casting. And speaking of the cast, let's get into that. Top billed is Morgan Freeman as Theodore Jodson. This is a character that is completely fictitious. So, he's not. A lot of these characters are actually in the historical account. This character is not. But Freeman was one of the first people that Spielberg showed the script to, and he actually wanted him to play Covey. But Freeman read the script, and he really actually wanted to be Jodson. So Freeman says, "I really like this character. I want to play him." And Spielberg was like, "You know what? Sure, you've got it. It's all yours." Nathaniel Hawthorne plays Martin Van Buren. I don't really have much to say about him. It's a fine performance. Anthony Hopkins plays John Quincy Adams, old bumbling man walking around. It was originally offered to Dustin Hoffman. Hoffman declined, which seems to be a trend now. Hoffman being offered decent parts and declining Spielberg. So I don't know what's up with that, but Hopkins was the second choice and gets the role. He had I can't remember if Hopkins had won, and I'm pretty sure he had won an Oscar at this point. So he was, well regarded. Sir Anthony Hopkins, that is. And I like Hopkins was talking about, he found a picture of John Quincy Adams. They showed him a picture, and he was like, "Hey, we actually kind of look alike." And they showed the picture in the making of, and yeah, there's just similar face structure and stuff. So that's kind of cool. Matthew McConaughey plays Roger Sherman Baldwin. McConaughey is kind of up and coming at this point. He had finally recently been offered a major role in a popular film. The real Baldwin is much older than McConaughey, but he plays the part well. And Spielberg really thought that McConaughey did a great job with this part. That was kind of a tough part to play, in his opinion. So yeah, McConaughey, I think, does a good performance. I think, in this film. Stellan Skarsgård as Tappan is kind of a nothing character in a way. Pete Postlethwaite as Hollibird. He's kind of the prosecuting lawyer throughout the movie. He's kind of in and out. You don't really learn much about him, but Postlethwaite, of course, does a great performance. Perfect. He's not like overly villainous, but enough that you don't like him. David Hamer plays Secretary John Forsyth in the movie. You have Anna Paquin, who had just, I want to say she was got a nomination for The Piano. She was young in The Piano, which had come out earlier in the 90s, and so she's a little older here in 97, but not a ton. And she plays the young Queen Isabella, Queen of Spain, who was a young child at this point in history, and she's in. I think she shows up twice for like a minute each, if that, and does this uh, fi- fine, I guess, Spanish accent. It's not really a much of a performance, anything to talk about. Thomas Millian plays Calderon. Um, Man, I really should have looked up um this guy's name and how to pronounce it because I've heard it several times, but it's still a hard name for me to pronounce. But um, Chiwetel Ejiofor plays Ensign Covey, the part that was originally offered to Freeman. Um, and this was one of his early roles. He's young in this movie. Uh, Ejiofor would eventually go on to win an Oscar for 12 Years a Slave in the lead role there. Really great actor. He's great in this part. He gets a pretty decent amount of screen time too in this movie. So yeah, he's great in the movie. You have the two Spanish sailors that are transporting the slaves on the Amistad, and Gino Silva as Ruiz and John Ortiz as Montez. They're fine, I guess. Um, Peter Firth as Captain Fitzgerald, who is the kind of British captain that testifies in court and blows up the fortress at the end. Spoiler. As you know, this is a spoiler podcast. Jeremy Northam plays Judge Coughlin, the young judge that comes in and kind of surprises everyone and declares that they're free, which they had to not be free for a while still. Arliss Howard is back after, just like Postlethwaite after Lost World, playing John C. Calhoun. He shows up for like a few minutes, does a really great performance as this. Is Calhoun the vice president at this point? I think. Um, yeah, I think so. Or was at some point. I don't know, but great. Southern. You know, I guess antagonist in a way shows up, gives his speech, well performed, and then you don't see him again. Um, and then you have the casting of the slaves, which is complicated. Spielberg had demanded that everyone cast be African born and able to use an African language, and the casting team had to work really hard to coordinate work visas. Some actors lost out on parts because they couldn't meet the production schedule. But yeah, a big ordeal getting together that cast of that played all of the slaves, a group of like 43 or something, like that. You also have some more prominent ones like Razak Adoti plays Yamba. He's a guy that has the Bible, if you recall that in the movie. And then of course, I saved the best for last, and Djimon Hounsou, one of probably his breakout role here, as Sinke. Um, Djimon was, this part of Sinke was a struggle to cast. They had offered it to Cuba Gooding Jr. He was coming off the Oscar for Jerry Maguire. He declined the role, which I read that later. He said that was a mistake. He should have taken it. Which maybe, I don't know. I don't know that I don't know that Gooding Jr. would have been as good as Djimon was in this role. But nonetheless, um, they're really struggling. It's 9 weeks before shooting, and they still have not cast it, despite lots of auditions in London and Paris and West Africa. And Spielberg's getting impatient. He's really wanting to keep momentum for Saving Private Ryan going. And so he almost just kind of postponed the production of Amistad because he didn't want to have to postpone Saving Private Ryan, trying to cast this part. And finally, Djimon Hounsou arrives. He's this 33-year-old model from Benin. He was born in Benin. His parents had sent him to France for school at the age of 14. Goes on, he drops out of college and was actually living homeless on the streets of Paris for a while. And then someone apparently kind of sees him on the street, says, "Hey, you look interesting." And it's like, "I have a photographer friend. I'd love you to connect with, and does. He does. He connects with this photographer guy and works for 7 years as a model before this. So he's comfortable in front of a camera. He's been doing modeling for a while. He's done some uh, film work, he's done some B movies. He's done a few music videos. So this really is his first movie. If you look at his filmography, he has a few things maybe before this. It's nothing that you would recognize. I think they're kind of nothing movies, for the most part. But Spielberg was charmed by him. This is a quote from Spielberg. He said, "Djimon has an inner peace and an outer strength that made him perfect for the role," unquote. And I agree. I think he's really like the best cast person in the movie. This kind of like complete unknown guy coming in, and man, he just does an incredible job. So that's the cast. Production starts in February of 1997. They do some filming in Puerto Rico. They do some filming in Rhode Island. They do some in Massachusetts and a little bit in California. So they're kind of all over for this movie. And then they're also do some in Connecticut. That's where the Amistad replica was built. So on set, a few days into filming, Debbie Allen kind of points out the almost total absence of African Americans on the technical crew to Spielberg. And this is a quote from her. And she says, quote, "And then the next day there were people. It was," then she's kind of speaking on, kind of defending Spielberg. She says, "It wasn't intentional. You get a group of people you're used to working with and you use them all the time," unquote, which is true. That's, she recognized that Spielberg's just getting the people that he knows and that he works with well. And that's kind of what directors do. But I appreciate that she pointed that out to him. And I appreciate that he was like, "Yeah, you're right. Let's get some African Americans on this technical crew." So that was kind of cool. Debbie Allen went on in the making of to talk about that one of the most difficult things was just recreating the Africans that were on the Amistad. Kind of giving the actors to get in that mindset. Chike Akpala in the making of doc was one of the actors. He said that there has never been a movie with so many Africans from the continent come together for a movie in America, especially not about them, a story about them. And so, he appreciated that. This actor did. They do bring in this guy, Dr. Arthur Abraham. He's a leading expert on African cultures, and he advised on all aspects of the Mende tribe, which is the tribe that this group was from in Sierra Leone. Spielberg said he was just brilliant in tutoring the actors, did a great job. He talked about, when they were trying to learn the language, Dr. Abraham would, he had no trouble intervening and correcting things and fixing things and teaching them what they needed to do. So great that he had him on set all the time. Spielberg, in the making of it, shows Spielberg at one point kind of going through and shaking their hands. Just really thanking them, really appreciative of them. They're having to wear these chains all the time, and Spielberg's just like, "I really, really appreciate it." We'll talk more about that in a minute. One thing I did think was funny or cool and then funny after is that Anthony Hopkins' long speech at the end was 7 pages of script, and Hopkins did it all in one take, which is really, really incredible. Spielberg had been kind of funny about the Sir title. He thought it was kind of silly, maybe. But after this, Spielberg said that he was just like astonished that Hopkins was able to do that, and he was calling him Sir thereafter, which I thought was funny. And I think I even heard somewhere too that just like a couple years after he had said that, or really just a year after he had said that Postlethwaite was, no, it was earlier that year. He had said Postlethwaite was the best actor he'd ever worked with. He said the same thing about Hopkins. So I don't know if he just took the throne for Spielberg or if he just says that too much. But yeah, the actors did love Spielberg. Hopkins, just commented on, what a great director he was. Freeman said, Freeman really appreciated it. He said he's in it up to his eyebrows, but he still is always like taking suggestions from us, the actors, or other people on set. Really open to hear ideas, which you do hear about Spielberg, which is cool. Matthew McConaughey was saying, just talking about how like he sees everything. He would show up. He talked about how he would show up on set, and for the first 10 minutes, he's like, I don't know what we're gonna do. I don't know exactly what shots we're gonna get. And McConaughey said he just kind of takes it in, looks around, and then after about 10 minutes, he just like takes off. He knows exactly what he wants. He can see everything. Jumps in, knows what to do with the camera. And yeah, he's working with Janusz Kaminski. This is their third movie together now, so they're kind of getting some rapport at this point. Spielberg was looking at some paintings by the Spanish painter Goya, and he really thought that was a good inspiration for kind of the atmosphere of the movie. So in Goya, there's a lot of use of like darkness and shadows and kind of just that. Really, a lot of what you see in the movie kind of comes from that inspiration from Goya. And yeah, I think it's a good looking movie. I don't think it looks like incredible, and I don't think it looks like horrible. You get some really good shots. We'll talk about some of the shots and the sequences later on. But yeah, I think it looks good. The lighting is always really good. There's a very cinematic, I guess you would say, use of lightning, like on the ship with the rain, and yeah, it's interesting. We talked about on the Color Purple episode how Spielberg worked with his crew to really figure out how to light for black actors, which at the time was actually like you're advancing because it wasn't given that much care back then in the 80s to that up to that point. And so Spielberg had done some work with lighting black actors well in the past. Probably brought some of that into this with Janusz. So yeah, it's something to appreciate as far as that goes. Production, more about the production. The actors had to learn Mende, which was the language of the Mende tribe in Sierra Leone. Spielberg did not want them speaking English with an accent. He wanted them speaking the language, and so Dr. Arthur Abraham, as I said, he was a linguistic expert as well. Like I said, he advised on all the African culture stuff. So he ensured that there was comprehensible Mende. Debbie Allen did. She was a producer, but she did a lot more than most producers do on this production. She worked with the African actors on their mental state. She was really trying to get them in the mindset of what they would be experiencing and what these people experienced back then. There was, in the making of doc, it showed them kind of it looked kind of like a dance studio, and they were really working on movement and choreography, and they were practicing what it would be like to walk in the chains. So they had the chains on. Just movement and posture and all of that they worked hard on. She's telling them, this is what's happening to you, this is what they're saying to you, how are you going to react? And Akpala, that I had mentioned earlier, one of those actors, had said that it was a real experience for him. He said after the first 5 minutes, sometimes you can forget you're in a movie. It's hard. Another guy, Samuel P.A., who is Sinke is the character name. His African name is actually Sengve P.A. So Samuel P.A. is a descendant of his, and was on the movie. So that's kind of cool. But he said it's just very stressful to go through. It was, yeah, it was hard on everyone. Djimon talked about how on the first day of shooting, he felt so ashamed to be treated like that. And yeah, just really, really tough. They used real chains. The actors would get uncomfortable. It was very real for these people at times on set. And so, um, yeah, it's tough because you've got this white director, you've got him directing um black people playing slaves in chains, and it's really messy. It's really it's different to me than his work on The Color Purple. In a way, yeah, it's just really messy, and we'll talk more about it. Like I said, in a bit. I really want to try to get a little bit into the weeds of that. Um, but that's the actors did feel the realness of that as they were on set. So um, Rick Carter, their production designer, talked about how when you do a period film, you really want to. So yeah, you've got the costumes and yeah, you've got this, but really you're looking to create an impression of transporting someone to that time. So you're really wanting to capture that feeling of being in that time, not just like get the physical things right. Um, so like they really did a lot of location scouting. Spielberg was talking about how you can't do like DC or anything like that because it's too modernized now. So they had to kind of go around um, in New England and Northeast and really look for good locations. Like I said, Mystic, Connecticut, they have a harbor there, and they built the replica of the Amistad. You'll see some scenes kind of at a harbor, and that's Mystic, Connecticut. So yeah, uh, and I thought this was funny. Morgan Freeman was talking about part of the allure of acting is wearing costumes. He's like, sometimes when I get to do a period film and I get to be in costume, I'm like, I feel like I'm really acting, which I thought was funny and kind of endearing. Um, one of the makeup guys, William Corso, was talking about how arduous of a process it was. You have 300 people every day that you have to change into, through costume and makeup and hair into various people that you're going to see on the street, vendors and artisans and well-to-do people and beggars and yeah, you just have all these different kinds of people that you're creating and putting on the streets as background people walking by. So a lot of work when you do a period piece as far as that goes. Um, and yeah, I think they did a fine job with all that. The score, I didn't really read a whole lot about the score. No, nothing. None of my sources really mentioned it hardly, or at all. It's a fine score. It was kind of stuck in my head for a few days. Afterwards, you kind of have the African kind of chanting. I should have looked up what if they're saying something maybe in Mende or something. But I'm not really sure. So, yeah, I didn't get my research done as far as the score goes. But I did think it was fine. It was a good, solid John Williams score. Not one of my favorites, but good. Yeah, the filming was completed on time. Spielberg moved on to the pre-production of Saving Private Ryan during the post-production of this movie. So he, I guess, similar to going on to working on Schindler's List while Jurassic Park was in post-production. A little different in this way than before. But yeah, he was really just wanting to move on to Saving Private Ryan. So he did do supervising for the post and editing work for Amistad. But yeah, he was kind of ready to, I guess, move on to the next thing whenever this was done filming. So yeah, he does that. This is something that we do need to talk about because they finished filming. They're doing a post. They're getting ready to release it, but all throughout the production of this movie, there's this kind of shadow over it. There's this plagiarism accusation by a woman named Barbara Chase Rebo. She had a 1989 book, novel, I believe, called Echo of Lions about this story. The story of the Amistad people and their revolt, uh, and trial and all that. And yeah, she had written this novel in '89. She had actually pitched it to some production companies, Amblin being one of those. And so she was claiming that Amblin had listened to her proposal. They declined the story. They felt like Cinque as a subject was too big. She said that they didn't return the manuscript or the novel they were sent, which I don't know what the custom is for that. I don't know if you reject it, if you're supposed to send it back, or if it's just kind of assumed that, yeah, you sent it to us. Why would we send it back? I don't know. It seems weird that you would think that they were going to send it back to me, but maybe that is what you're supposed to do. I don't know. Yeah. So she had tried to get like an amicable settlement that DreamWorks rejected. Amicable, I guess, is depending on whose perspective, but DreamWorks rejects her. She kind of, I read that she demanded $10 million and screen credit. And so DreamWorks rejected that. They were arguing that a story based on history cannot be owned by anyone, and that Debbie Allen had been carrying this project around since 1978, and even buying, rights to a book in '84. Um, so yeah, Barbara Chase Rebo was claiming that they plagiarized specifically the fictional depiction of the John Quincy Adams and Cinque relationship, as well as the black printer Jodson. So I don't know if in her book the character was named Jodson, Theodore Jodson. If it was, it's kind of like, oh, okay. Um, but I definitely the idea that there was this black printer, I guess that was like an ex-slave kind of thing. Um, what she, was in her novel. She investigates further. She finds out that the initial script was called The Other Lion, which, it's like, okay, but that was like that was part of the story, that was part of Cinque's kind of why people were following him sort of thing. So, you can't lay claim on, oh, I have lion in my title and they had lion in theirs. Well, yeah, it's part of the story. And then she had also kind of found out that the end of the film had changed during shooting because they were thinking that it was too close to her novel. So yeah, it's kind of like, okay, so, but they changed it. I don't know. It's all, who knows? It's very sticky, all that stuff. 2 days before the movie was released, her complaint was deemed inadmissible by a judge on the grounds that the act of plagiarism had not been clearly established, which I can see. You can tell by how I'm reacting that I'm like, okay, but you know, um, so the only thing that I could say would be like, oh, this is, if the black printer was named Jodson and did the same things that this guy did, because it's a completely fictional character, that would be like, hmm. But other than that, I'm kind of like, I don't know. It seems like it's the same story. Debbie Allen's had this rights to this other book since '84. I don't know that you can claim just because you pitched it, and they didn't like your pitch. I don't know. Um, it's all sticky. They did eventually, in February of 1998, a few days before Oscar nominations were announced, they did have a settlement out of court for a confidential amount. And really, from what I could tell, Barbara Chase Rebo after that praised the film. She thought it was great. And yeah, just weird. She wasn't going to, though, until she got her settlement, I guess. Yeah, so the film releases in wide in December 25th of 1997. It did have a limited release on December 16th, I believe. Yeah, worldwide box office of 67.5 million. It had a the limited open was in 322 theaters. It made like 4.5 million on that opening weekend. So I think it was number 5 in the box office for that weekend. And it really doesn't take off huge after it expands. Sometimes you can do a limited release, and then, but once you expand it, it really takes off. But yeah, this one didn't really. I think the budget was 30 to 40 million, somewhere in there. And so eventually making 67.5 million really like isn't that great. You do make your money back and make some profit, but that's not really what you're looking for with a movie like this that had a budget that big. And it didn't help that the Titanic opens the next weekend, and it was just buried by the Titanic, which obviously became took over from Jurassic Park, the highest grossing film of all time for a while. So yeah, and then it probably didn't help too that it really, even though the plagiarism thing didn't go anywhere in court, it was still kind of weighed down by that and controversy around that. And then also just kind of racial controversy in general that Spielberg, I think, kind of expected, weighed it down a bit. Kind of like here we go again with Spielberg. But ultimately the reception was mixed. The reviews were pretty mixed. A lot of people judged it as an important story, but kind of weighed down by its message, which I can see. And then, people talking about Spielberg failing to make people forget it was directed by a white man. Even years later, in 2014, Steve McQueen, who directed 12 Years a Slave, gave it a resounding third thumbs down, saying, who are the heroes in the film? Anthony Hopkins and Matthew McConaughey. For me, maybe because I'm black, a story with slaves has to be told from their point of view. And I, as you'll see in a minute, tend to agree. There were some positive reviews. I watched a clip from the Ebert and Siskel little review show, and they both really liked it. I was surprised, but yeah, they both really enjoyed it. They thought it was well acted and looked great, and I guess they thought the story was good. Yeah, interesting. But yeah, so the movie does get 4 Oscar nominations, no wins. The nominations were for Anthony Hopkins for supporting actor, cinematography, costume design, and music. So yeah, this is one of Ruthie Carter's Oscar nominations for costume design. No wins. I think probably rightly so. I don't know that any of those really deserve the win a whole lot, but yeah, let's go back to that's kind of it as far as the production. There's not a whole lot out there about this movie, really, because it didn't really, if you say, have you seen Spielberg's Amistad? People are going to be like, what is Spielberg's Amistad? Most people haven't probably even heard of the movie, just like most people hadn't heard of this historical event, and really still didn't. I really hadn't ever heard of this event until preparing for this this podcast and watching this movie. So it definitely didn't do the job that he was hoping for it to do. But yeah, so problems with Spielberg directing. This is I found this article from back then by a columnist named Cortland Malloy. He was writing for let me find it. What publication? He was writing for the Washington Post. And this was a review from December 14th in 1997. But I'm going to quote him a few times out of this review. But I figured I'd start with a quote by him to get us into this subject. And Malloy says Amistad is essentially about how two white guys, actors Anthony Hopkins and Matthew McConaughey, come to the rescue of some Africans bound for slavery. There is some fine acting in the movie, but the film does not come close to doing for African Americans in the Middle Passage what Spielberg's Schindler's List did for the Jews and the Holocaust. So, I think that's ultimately what we have to look at. Because that's why Debbie Allen went to Spielberg. She thought he did Schindler's List. I think he can handle this subject. And while I get where she was coming from, I really think that just isn't. I don't know. That just doesn't ring true to me. And here's the thing. We talked about Spike Lee and others. Kind of were like, we're not going to be able to get the budget we need to make this movie. It's a good story, but studios just aren't going to give black directors with a bunch of black actors the money we want and need to make the movie. That's very unfortunate. And the problem is, so do you need someone with the cloud of Steven Spielberg to make this movie? Do you need Steven Spielberg so that you can, as the director, so that you can really like get the budget you need and the acting, the prestigious actors that you need? Here's the problem with that. For The Color Purple, I would say you kind of did. It was unprecedented to have all black cast like The Color Purple, and a big movie like that. You really needed a guy like Steven Spielberg, who kind of had earned the right to, to make that sort of movie, and really not earn the right to make that movie particularly. I think that's I'm saying that kind of wrong, but had earned the clout to say, this is what I'm doing. Y'all give me the money, and I'm Steven Spielberg. Y'all give me the money and I'm going to make the movie. And there's truth to that. The problem with it here is this is with his own studio. It's with DreamWorks. He started this new studio. He didn't have to direct this movie. He obviously is really itching to get on to Saving Private Ryan. So while he was touched by the story and thought it was important, he obviously has other things on his mind as far as directing goes. So I question, that makes me kind of question, Spielberg, when you listen to interviews, he's always very sincere. But I'm like, you're really itching to go on to Saving Private Ryan. You almost just canceled this one because you couldn't find cast sync. And so there's that. And also, you own the studio, man. You can just find a black director that you think is worth investing in and give it to him. It's your studio. Yeah, you have two other co-founders, but it's your studio. You're the one ultimately deciding who to give the money to make these movies. And I don't know. I'm just so that argument just doesn't work. You need someone like Steven Spielberg with his clout and his power in the industry to get this movie made, but he doesn't have to be the one to direct it when he owns the studio that's producing it. So that's an issue. I think he's well intended. Very, very, very extremely sincere and well intended. But good intentions are not always an excuse for a lack of wisdom and a lack of just knowing when's the right time to be well intended and what's the right way to use those good intentions. I don't know. I mean, so there's problematic things in this movie that, to me, it's okay, yes, we're depicting history. So does it matter if the director's white or black, or whatever? We're depicting history, so we need to depict things the way they are. The problem is, yes, I think it does matter. And the reason is you have a guy like Steve McQueen who directs 12 Years a Slave. 12 Years a Slave is a phenomenal movie. Is it fun to watch? Absolutely not. I remember seeing that movie in theaters. It was a really packed theater, probably on opening weekend. And it was completely dead quiet in that theater afterwards. People kind of filed out. Nobody really said anything. There were maybe some hushed whispers here and there, but I walked all the way to my car. I think I said bye to the guy I had gone to see it with, and that's about it. We didn't really talk afterwards. And it's because it's a devastating and hard and, um, man, just a tough watch on a subject that should be tough to watch. And I just feel like with Schindler's List, Spielberg was very close to this. He was wrestling. He had some inner wrestling with his own Jewishness that he was going through. He was really close to this movie. He was in Poland where it happened, at Auschwitz, at these camps, filming with, people, with a producer who had survived it. Um, this is different. It's different. So, yes, he did it with Schindler's List. He's not the man to do it for a movie like this. He's not close enough to it. He doesn't have the experience or the lineage to really like tap into what he needs to tap into. Um, are there scenes that are harrowing and hard to watch in this? Yes. But it's all about the tone and the consistency of that tone. And I don't think the tone is consistent enough for the movie to have earned what it shows. Um, the tone is very different from Schindler's List. It feels at times light and inspirational, and then with some harrowing stuff thrown in. Most of the scenes of the slaves are just like them filing in back and forth between, where they're being held in the courthouse and them just kind of standing there. I don't know. Uh, you have things like a slave seeing a black man in a carriage and them calling out to him and him ignoring them, and they're like, he's a white man. And it's like, yeah, do we need that from a white director? Do we need that? Does he really understand what's going on there? Maybe. Maybe he can empathize with it to a degree, but and then, like I was talking about, these harrowing scenes. You have naked black bodies being whipped and tossed overboard. And I question, is this earned by the film? Are these scenes earned? Even just regardless of whether the director is white or black. These scenes just do not feel earned by the movie. When they started happening, I was taken aback and I was like, this is tough to watch, but also like the movie has not been dealing with this. It's just thrown at you. And yeah, it you start off with the revolt and these black people like massacring all of the Spanish crewmen, and then you see them. You don't really know who they are or what they're about for most of the movie, and then all of a sudden you're being thrown into them being whipped and tossed overboard, tied to stones, and they're all naked and they're all in chains and being, brutally beaten. And I'm just like, this has not been earned. This is another quote from Cortland Malloy. He says, quote, "We see the face of a black man who is being whipped to death, but we don't see the face of the white man who's whipping him. We see black people drowning after being thrown overboard, but we never see who did it. The faces of the people shown actually catching slaves are black. The hands counting the money are white." Unquote. And I think he's getting at something. Another aspect of this is it's like Spielberg wants to show the horrors of what happened, maybe without stepping on too many toes. And that's a big problem with a movie like this. That's a big problem, because you shouldn't depict that unless you're willing to step on toes, unless you're willing to make people as uncomfortable as possible. Because that's the thing. It's uncomfortable to watch as it is, but honestly not uncomfortable enough. And it's not uncomfortable enough seeing the slaves led back and forth. These people enslaved and imprisoned, waiting to hear if they're going to be freed or not, having no control over it themselves. There's a lot of problems here. And then a big problem in the script, I think. Baldwin, at one point, talking to Cinque, equates himself and his situation. He's like, I'm receiving death threats. I'm not going to have really a job after this. I need you just as much as you need me, sort of thing. And he's kind of equating his situation with death threats from his clients to Cinque's situation. And the film doesn't really deal with this. It doesn't challenge it. And that's a problem. I don't think you get a scene like that with a black director who would be aware of the issues with that. And yes, you have people on set. You have a producer that wanted you to make this movie, that approached you for it. But you're Steven Spielberg, who, who's really going to come and say, like, hey, you can't do this. Hey, this is all wrong. He would probably welcome it, or say he would welcome it. And I really do think Spielberg does take advice well and make adjustments well. And when things don't work, he makes adjustments. We've seen that through his career. But I just don't think he was getting that on this movie with things like that. Does he get anything right? It's, maybe, you have John Quincy Adams bluntly point out that if Cinque were white, he wouldn't be there. But, that's obvious. And really in that context, it's kind of like the people that he's trying to convince don't really care. Like that doesn't mean anything to them like it does to us now. And then Cinque at the end is like, what words did you use to convince them? And Hopkins Adams says yours. But he didn't really. He took his African idea of, tapping into his ancestors, and he kind of Americanized it. So I mean, it's appropriation. It's not using his words. It's appropriating his words. But I mean, it worked and it helped them get free. So that's good. But he didn't use his words. I thought that was another problematic thing in the script, that I don't know that you would have gotten that with a black director that is tapped into the black experience and knows that, no, that's not what you did. Another problem with this is a choice by Spielberg. He tries to be real by not subtitling the African characters for a lot of the movie. The problem to me is that this dehumanizes them anymore because of the way that is employed. This is another quote from Malloy on this. He says, quote, "To me, that oversight echoes a powerful historical message that black humanity can exist only in relation to whites." Pause that quote. What he's talking about is really the only time that the African characters are subtitles is if they are talking to white people and there's not a translator and we need to understand it, or if they're talking about what some white people are doing and it would be best for us to understand it. They're never subtitled if they're just on their own talking amongst themselves about themselves. So I'll start that quote over with that context. Quote, "To me, that oversight echoes a powerful historical message that black humanity can exist only in relation to whites, and even then only in subservience. When blacks are among their own, the film seems to say what's in their hearts and minds is just not worth knowing." Now, is this Spielberg's intention? No. He's just trying to be cinematic and make it real. And, we don't understand what they're saying, but, so we're just not going to know. We have to try to feel what they're saying. But the reality is, it does come across this way. I was thinking the same thing when I was watching the movie. I was like, why can't I understand why, I want to know what they're talking about amongst themselves. I don't want to just know what they're talking about when they're talking to Adams or Baldwin or, you know, uh, it's very frustrating. Um, you know, we go on to, kind of really want to wrap this up. I'm just getting more. I'm starting to convince myself that I like this movie even less as I'm going through this episode, because I kind of was feeling like it's an okay movie, but the more I think about these problems and issues, I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's too problematic to say it's an okay movie. Maybe it's just not that great of a movie because of these problems. Um, the acting, it's like, yeah, the acting's fine. A great performance I think, by Djimon Hounsou. I don't want to take that away from him because it's an incredible performance. Powerful, visceral, brutal, but also like subdued at times and very dynamic. Uh, yeah, don't I can't take that away from him. Some of the other acting is good, but it looks pretty good. It's Spielberg and Kaminsky. It's gonna look good. Uh, the production value is great. It's a big budget movie. It better be. Um, but on the whole, just it doesn't work. The script is just not good. There's all these problems, and then you're closing on the destruction of the Lomboko slave fortress. Martin Van Buren lost the election. And you're trying to give like this, I guess you have this inspirational speech by Hopkins, and then you're cutting to the like this cathartic moment with the fortress being destroyed, and we got our comeuppance because Van Buren lost the election with all of his political manipulations, and yeah, great. You get title cards about how Cinque returned home to his village destroyed by civil war. He didn't know where his family was. They probably were killed. And when the movie ends, you really just want to know Cinque's story. It's like, honestly, like, yeah, it's important for American history, I guess, this story, but for a movie, for me to be emotionally engaged in this and not just like be tuning in for a somewhat accurate history lesson, I really need an emotional attachment and an emotional driving force. And Cinque would be such and you see it in the film. That's the thing. You see moments like I think the moment where he is starting to open up more to Baldwin and Jodson, and Tappan, I think, is theirs too. Um, Tappan is such a forgettable character. At some point in the movie, I'm just like, what happened to that guy? But bunny trail thought. But yeah, you have these moments where you really see not just like the depth of this character, his inner struggle and inner conflict about who he is, and is he really a leader? Is he really um, you know, who he has to act like he is? Um, there's a ton there, and it's acted so well by Djimon Hounsou that I'm like, man, I want more of Cinque. Um, it, at the end of the day, it puts too much focus on too many of the wrong things. It even adds, you're adding a fictional black character that kind of he's just a prop. He doesn't really do anything. Like, what's the real function of Jodson in the movie? Just to be a black ex-slave that can be like, yeah, we need to do this story. Like, and it's Morgan Freeman, and I'm like, what is this character? I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's very frustrating. You do have people that defend it. Like, I'm listening to a biography, that is kind of like a film by film biography of Spielberg by Molly Haskell. And she kind of defends it and says that he gives as much prominence and individuality to black characters as he can while staying true to history. And I just disagree. You could have a greatly historically accurate movie, uh, and but also like focus in and expand a character like Cinque, giving his perspective, giving him the majority of the screen time, the focus, the yeah, I, I don't know. I disagree with that. Um, and this just doesn't have the great source material that The Color Purple had, so it has that against it as well. So, did we need someone with the cloud of Steven Spielberg to make this? No, we didn't. We didn't need Steven Spielberg to make this movie. We needed Spielberg to find a black director to invest in to make this movie. That's what we needed. That's not what we got. I would like to think that if Spielberg this came across this table today, that's what we would get. But I don't know. It's tough. A couple other quibbles that are a little bit. I talked about the tone. That was a quibble. It just a little bit on that. It's too many. It's too light with, as I said, with harsh moments thrown in. Just think about, compare this movie to Schindler's List and to 12 Years a Slave, two movies that I've talked about in this episode, where you really feel the weight of the subject. And in this movie, you just don't feel it. In fact, like the tone ends in an inspirational tone. Yeah, you have the upsetting title cards at the end about Cinque, but everything leading up to that has been kind of like inspirational. We can make a difference in America, and we've got to. I don't know. It's I don't really know. My other quibble is that the John Quincy Adams speech is this long. I talked about he did it in one take. That's great, but like, it's kind of incomprehensible. I don't even know. Like, he's tapping into the forefathers of America, I guess. I don't really know what his point is. In that, like, oh, we need to look to our slave owning ancestors to get inspiration to free the slaves. I don't. I don't know if that's the answer, John Quincy. And then it like cuts straight. He finishes his speech. He sits down and it cuts straight to the decision to free all of these African people. Very anticlimactic. Very. To me, it was just incomprehensible. I was like, he's still talking. What is? And I didn't feel like he was really saying anything. I don't know. I've got to move on from this. we're gonna move on from the problems. I think this movie is very problematic. I think I've made an okay case for that with the help of Cortland Malloy. Thank you, Mr. Malloy, for your review in 1997. It really like put to words. I'm gonna link that review in the Washington Post in the episode description so that you can read it for yourself, because he talks about way more than I quoted him on, and I have another quote from him in a bit when we start wrapping things up. But I highly encourage you to go read his review and read his perspective on it, because I think that's important. He really put to words some things that I couldn't really quite find the way to express. And so I really appreciated that. And it really helped me with my breakdown I just went through of why this is so problematic. But let's move on. Let's talk about some things that are more Spielberg centered, more filmmaking centered. Some Spielberg distinctives. I always like to talk about Spielberg distinctives, things that you find in his movies. One of the things I wrote down was the stars, because going all the way back to Close Encounters, he had come up with this incredible way to make stars pop. I'm assuming he's done something similar here when they're out on the Amistad ship and you see the star-filled sky. It just looks really cool. It looks kind of fantastical in a way, which is great for most Spielberg movies. Maybe not for this one, but it looks good. Lots of low-angle, medium, and close shots. Spielberg loves those low-angle shots, looking up at his characters. Get some good silhouettes here too. My favorite is Cinque against the bonfire whenever he learns that the original decision by Judge Coughlin is not the end. They're going to the Supreme Court. Great shot. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good, interesting shots. There's a lot of good images. There's a lot of good sequences that are interesting and cinematically like interesting. So it's not this movie isn't a total. Like I said, it's really just the problems with like the script and the story and the way it's told and the perspective it's told from that are the problems. Kind of filmmaking wise, it's actually like I think pretty good. If it had a better story and script to go along with it, with like I said, a black director, I think this would have been a really great movie. But we didn't get that. We got what we got. The opening, as I said, is visceral and brutal. In an extreme close up of the eyes, which is interesting. I thought that was interesting and in a cool shot. If you go look at that Malloy review, he was like, he felt like he was making him a monster, like kind of like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park, which is valid. I don't know if that's, yeah, it's a valid perspective. But I thought that opening was very, very well done. Molly Haskell in that book I mentioned a minute ago had said that his opening is really a short film unto itself. Does it, something else Malloy mentions is, does it make you feel like, oh, the black people are going to now need some white people to save them because they've just done this brutal act? Maybe, but it is a very well made opening. This was interesting, I thought. There's this part where Martin Van Buren is kind of hiring on Judge Coughlin to take on this case, hoping that Coughlin is going to, send the slaves somewhere, keep them in captivity. He's the whole thing with Van Buren is he's up for re-election. He doesn't want to make the southern states mad with this case and freeing these black people, so he's trying to squash it, or get a decision made that would keep them in captivity so that he can get the southern vote. Is this all this like political positioning and stuff that is going on throughout the movie too? Another thing that it's focusing on that maybe we didn't need a whole lot of focus on. But yeah, there's this, all that to say, there's this scene where they're kind of coming together to like take a picture of them shaking hands, I guess for a newspaper or something. And it shows the lens and they're like upside down in the lens, obviously. And I don't know, I thought that was an interesting kind of artistic way to visually show us like how upside down, literally in the lens, but also like figuratively, in the way that the process works, how upside down things are from the way they should be. I don't know. I thought that was interesting. The other sequence that I really, really loved was there's this sequence where Yamba is telling, he's been carrying around this Bible that he kind of snatched from a white man, and which I don't know why Yamba and Cinque are the only people in this church. And then you also have the judge that's like in the same church, and it's like intercutting between Yamba and Cinque and the judge. I don't really understand why, geographically why they were there in just them two in that church. But that's beside the point, because I think it's a really interesting sequence where Yamba takes this Bible, he flips through, there's pictures in it all throughout it, and he kind of goes to the New Testament with Jesus, starting with the picture of like the birth of Christ, the nativity. And he tells Cinque the story of Christ with these pictures in the Bible, and pretty accurately. He's really just going off of the pictures and going off of probably like a culture of storytelling and understanding how stories work, which is it's really cool. It's a really intriguing thing to think about. Like, how did he figure out so spot on what the story was? And it's, you can get into like storytelling and how storytelling works cross culturally because of just how humans tend to tell stories and the stories that we're attracted to, and that mean things to us. So I thought it was intriguing in that way, but also just like in the way that Yamba like tells him the story, and he gets to the part where Christ ascends. There's this picture of him ascending to heaven. He realizes like, oh, he died, but then he's back with his followers and he's going into the sky. And he tells them that when they kill you here, you go into the sky. It's not so bad. And then he's I don't know. It's interesting. It's like this. I don't know. This Haskell in that the book I've mentioned, Molly Haskell's book on Spielberg. She talks about like how this really points to the religious sincerity that Spielberg has in his movies. A lot of times, there's this kind of like childlike identification with faith in a way that he's always had, even if he for a long time felt distant from his faith. I wrote down this quote from her because I thought it was interesting. She said, quote, real audacity in the way he honors and even identifies with expressions of faith. Religious feeling seems to have no place in our ironic and secular age. Even the word icon has lost its original mystical power. Yet Spielberg goes where few directors dare, into the realm of faith and mystery. That yearning for home that figures so prominently as a Spielberg theme derives its power from something akin to religious feeling. In Amistad, that longing is only partially fulfilled on earth. The freed black Africans return to Sierra Leone, but their land is in civil war. Also, their families are slaughtered. But Spielberg wants us to feel hope that the past can affect the future, hope that their accomplishments will be remembered, and their sacrifice redeemed. So I appreciated that quote from Haskell. I think it runs into all the problems that we've talked about with is that the movie we need? Probably not. But it is there. And I did really enjoy that sequence. I thought it spoke to the universality of storytelling with Christ, the Christ story. I thought it spoke to finding hope in the midst of trial. It even there's this visual storytelling. Spielberg can do it pretty well. They're walking back after this event, after this conversation. They're walking back to the courthouse in a line, and Yamba looks over and sees a ship coming in, and there's three masts, and they're shaped like cross, kind of on the ship, and you can see he's kind of like it's almost like he's seeing it as like an omen of like, I think we're gonna be okay, maybe, sort of thing. And then they're acquitted by this judge. They're declared free, which ultimately doesn't hold as they go to the Supreme Court. But I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. A cool sequence, in my opinion. The characters are good. Not good. The characters are. There's a lot of characters. I guess that's what I really meant to say. There's a lot of characters. Cinque is the most interesting character, and I've already talked about it. We really don't get enough of him. He's such a deep character. He has such depths to explore that we just don't get to. Not in a way that's consistent throughout the movie, because it's jumping around. It gives some time to Jotson, who I don't really even know what he's doing there. Debbie Allen said that he was kind of a representative of an African American ex-slave who is educated, going down the middle road of abolition and not yet militant. Okay, but he doesn't do anything in the movie really. Like he talks to John Quincy Adams, like I guess there's a time or two where he kind of pushes the plot forward, but he's not a real character. Um, I mean, Tappan is kind of the same. He, you know, he kind of even less than Jodson, even more than Jodson, I guess, disappears. I mean, and really, you're jumping around to like Martin Van Buren stuff, which gives too much time to that. And it's not even true. Like they didn't even campaign back then. So I mean, I guess it's interesting for a movie, but they didn't campaign like that back then. So, I don't know why you need to invent that historically for the movie, especially when like it's only mild. Like you could mention it, and that's all we would need. We don't need to keep jumping to Van Buren. Um, Baldwin's an interesting character. You know, he's this ordinary man thrust into an extraordinary circumstance, really thrusts himself into it, probably looking to take on something that might get his name out there. And he's not really sympathetic to the cause. You can tell he's just in it because he's wants to be a good lawyer, I guess, wants to get his name out there, thinks he has a good case. And he does grow to be sympathetic to the case, but then like he's dropped in the script at some point. Like it switches to John Quincy Adams, and then Baldwin's like literally just sitting there doing nothing for the climax at the Supreme Court. He just sits there. He shakes Cinque's hand afterward, like, yay, I guess. But yeah, John Quincy Adams is an okay character, I guess. Adams, he was not really a friend of abolition or slavery, either one really, but ultimately found himself on the side of abolition, compelled to fight for these people, sympathetic to the cause eventually, I guess, or maybe all kind of like one of those, he was all along, but he's finally doing something about it. One of those things, I guess. You get a lot of that in this historical period. Yeah, the character's fine. I've already talked about some quibbles with the way he's used. You know, I don't know. There's a lot of. I just don't want to dive back into the problems. As far as themes go, I don't know. I mean, you have like Debbie Allen. So Debbie Allen said the film is about the power of the human spirit and courage and freedom. That was a direct quote from the making of documentary, and I'm like, great. That's about as vague and meaningless as the speech John Quincy Adams gives at the end. I don't know. So what does that mean? How do we see that in the film? Really, what do we learn about the human spirit? That I don't really know what we learn about the human spirit. That we fight for freedom. I don't know. Great, I guess. It would have been better, well received, that theme in a different movie, maybe. You get the theme of kind of like, you know, Baldwin's working with logic and common sense against a corrupt system. You kind of have the mingling of self-serving politics with justice and how it, you know, the self-serving politics always seems to take precedence. You know, that's good and great. It's a great thing to have in film and to explore. And it wants to be about that, but it can't just be about that. That's the problem. This movie, because of the subject matter and because of the prominence of the Cinque character, it can't just be about that. That's where this movie is so split. It wants to be about these corrupt systems, but also about these slaves and Cinque, and it's got a split focus, and it can't do either one well because of that. And Lincoln, I think eventually, we'll get to Lincoln eventually. I think kind of is able to focus on that because that's what it's about fully, is those systems and navigating that. And it's a better movie because it has a more singular focus. Um, but yeah. Another thing that I really liked was you have that scene I mentioned, where you get the silhouette of Cinque against the bonfire. He's upset. And it's this sequence where Baldwin has come to tell him that, hey, I knew I told y'all once this finished, that would be it. And that almost was the case, but they're going to the Supreme Court now. And you get this really great reaction from both. What I really liked about this scene is in this scene too, Ejiofor, Ejiofor. I wish I would have looked up how to pronounce his name. Even he in this scene kind of turns on Baldwin as like, no, I'm not translating that. This is ridiculous. And you get Cinque. I love this. He says in the movie, he says, "What kind of place is this where laws almost work? How can you live like that?" I think that's just really, really good. That was a well-written little part. We don't get a ton of that, but I thought that was good. I don't really have a whole lot more. I guess just to wrap up everything, I'm going to wrap it up with this quote from John Quincy Adams in the movie, who says, "Whoever tells the best story wins." And just to wrap up all of this, sometimes, yes, I think that's true. I do. I think it's a good quote. I think it's largely true to life, and whoever tells the best story wins. But sometimes you have to have the wisdom to know which stories are yours to tell. And I think that's where this movie fails. I think Spielberg did not have the wisdom to know that this wasn't his story to tell as much as he sympathized with it and as much as he thought it was important. It wasn't his to tell. And he had the power to give it to someone whose it was to tell and didn't. And this movie left zero cultural mark, despite its importance, because it was in the wrong hands. It had no cultural mark, no cultural importance. I hadn't really heard of this movie before I started doing this series. And it's made competently. Technically it looks great, but it lacks the weight it needs. Just one more quote from Cortland Malloy from that review. He says, quote, "What captured the imagination of many African Americans about the Amistad story was the courage and determination of the leader Cinque. In the hands of Spielberg, Amistad has become a tribute to the American justice system. I wish black filmmakers Spike Lee, John Singleton, and Carl Franklin had what it takes financially and otherwise to bring the perspective of an African American to such an important topic. Then again, they might come up with something like Sankofa, the powerful movie by Ethiopian-born filmmaker Haile Gerima that so few people, black or white, went to see. Maybe all we really want to do is laugh and clap at slavery, in which case Amistad may just be the movie for you." Sobering. Very sobering quote. I have not seen this movie, Sankofa, but now I really want to. I'm putting it on my list. When I read that quote, I was like, well, I've got to see this movie. And I think it's true. I have a long way to go. But I do try to make it a point to watch movies made by black filmmakers about their experience. You have directors like Spike Lee and like Steve McQueen making these movies. Steve McQueen has a great kind of series of films. It's the Small Axe series. I think this on Amazon. It came out. It might have even released like during the pandemic. I think. But there's 4 great films about black communities in England, which is Steve McQueen. I'm pretty sure is black English director. But but yeah, great films. And of course, he has 12 Years a Slave, but those are really great as well. And Spike Lee is a great filmmaker. There's a lot of great black filmmakers. I'll try to link. There's this critic who has this humongous list of films about the black experience by black filmmakers on Letterboxd, and I'll try to remember to put a link to that in the episode description as well, so that you can take on that task of working on knocking out some of those films yourself. I think it's important to watch films from people with different experiences from you. And I just think it's unfortunate that I wouldn't be covering this movie if Spielberg had made the right choice, because it wouldn't be in this Spielberg series. I really think he should have used his new studio to give this movie uh to someone that he thought had what it takes, and he's generally a pretty good judge of that. Over his career, he had done a lot of producing, um, and you know, I just wish he would have given this budget to a black filmmaker that could have given it the perspective it needed. Um, I had this movie rated a 3-star, 6 out of 10 when I came in. I think maybe get down to like 2.5 stars, 5 out of 10 now that I've talked myself down on it with all the problems. Um, yeah, I really wish this would have been a better movie. I was hoping it would be, um, but I just think it has too many problems with being a film that just, I mean, with a ultimately, what I think ends up being a bad script, a bad screenplay that doesn't know what story it wants to tell, and just with the wrong perspective by the wrong director. Um, it's unfortunate because it looks good. Production value is great. It's got some great performances. I mean, just the fact that we got Djimon Hounsou out of this is just great. I just love that. He really, if the movie's worth watching for anything, it's for his performance, which I think is just so good. But yeah, ultimately, this is going to end up, in a bottom tier Spielberg for me as far as how much I like it. But yeah, that's really all I have. Like I said, next week I'm gonna get into a little bit of like the beginnings of DreamWorks and its history, and I'm going to review by request of a supporter of the podcast, Joe Wood. He has requested that I review a movie that he loves that I have not seen. Well, I have seen it now, but I hadn't before he requested. I'm gonna do a little short review of the movie 13 Assassins by Takashi Miike. It's a 2010, I think, remake of an older movie of the same name. But yeah, I'm going to do a quick review of that, and alongside kind of breakdown of DreamWorks, just kind of as a little bonus look into Spielberg's career. So that's next week. The week after that, we'll be jumping back into Spielberg fully with his film Saving Private Ryan. Came out the next year in 1998. So that's what you have to look forward to. If you have any thoughts or comments on this, I would love to hear from you. You can do that on the website. There's a place to leave a voicemail or send an email, establishingshotpod.com. I would love it if you would go do that there. If you want to be a supporter of the podcast and make me watch a movie and review it on the podcast for everyone to hear, you can do that too. You can find out how to do that at establishingshotpod.com as well. I would love for you to support the show. There's kind of some perks to that I would love to get into. So yeah, go check that out. It starts at $5 a month. You can be a supporter. So it just helps me be able to pay for the production value alongside like buying the discs so that I can watch these and get all the special features and buy the books for the research. There's a lot that goes into it. I had to buy more notepads because I had filled some up. So there's a lot that goes into this. So I would love for you to support the show. I do it all on my own, scheduling and guests and hosting and research and keeping all the online stuff. So this is completely self-produced. So really like to keep this going, I do need supporters. So I would love for you to support the show if you can. But yeah, that's really all I have left this week. Looking forward to the next couple of episodes, and I hope you are too. But until then, I've been Eli Price, and you've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.